All right, so it's been about a week, and in that week, Eric has already done a lot here. We've got the harness on here. We got the U-cooler in. We've got most of the wiring and everything hooked up here, and we're getting ready to stab it actually into the transmission here. We've left it just kind of sitting on this mount. So what I think we're going to do is we're going to pull it up in the air. We're going to see if we can put the starter on it before we put it in there, because it's kind of hard to get to way back here in the back. And we're going to see if we can get away with doing that without having to put it in after we put the motor against the transmission. So let's get started by lining up these splines. All right, so our thought here is if you look at this sister engine over here, it's got the starter mounted right here, and it's pretty clear of anything. I think we can get away with mounting that starter here in this hole, hooking the wires up from the harness that's already on the engine, and then shoving the engine into the transmission over there, and it shouldn't interfere with anything. So that's our thought. It'd be a lot easier to just do it right here while the engine's kind of free before putting it in there. So. That's right.
And then do all the rest. How'd your rebuild really work, you know?
Yeah. Okay, we're back here hooking up. We got the transmission linkage we were hooking up here, and I noticed that there's a little spring right there underneath where the shift linkage goes. And that little spring, there's supposed to be a ball bearing. And what that is detents to keep the shift linkage from moving around and in place, right? You got 1, 2, 3 holes right there for the ball bearing to kind of rest in place and keep it from moving. And I was like, oh crap, we lost ball bearing. Where are we gonna find one of those? And I just so happened to glance down. I don't know if you guys can see it from here, but down there on that orange wire is the ball bearing that dropped. So what are the odds that we found that? So we're gonna grab a magnet and put that back in place, and hopefully I don't drop it in the process. Like that? That's perfect. All right, we got transmission linkage hooked up. We got the detent ball in here. I used the power, a little bit of masking tape, kind of hold it in place, and then put the ball on there, or put the bracket on there. Next thing is we're gonna put these transmission cooler lines in that are coming from our cooler. Since I'm back here in this compartment, I can reach them rather easily. Yep. All right, hold it. "30 minutes later." Oh, there it goes, there it goes. I think we're in. Woo! Hold on, give me. Okay, go ahead. I'm pushing down on the. All right, so hard part of this is over. We got the transmission stabbed in, or the engine stabbed in transmission. We got the bolts run down by hand. We've got the motor mounts on. The bolts are down through it. So all we have to do is throw the nuts up. So it's set in place. Transmissions, and all we have to do is tighten all the hardware now. After that, we'll finish running the lines. We'll run the fuel on this side. We've got to run, this guy goes up here, and then the other line goes on the bottom of this filter, and then we'll have to run all our solenoids and our wiring up against the firewall that we've got labeled there. Then we'll do the timing and run the spark plug wires, put the cooler in the back, and then all the odds and ends, and then we'll be able to fire this thing up. So now begins the montage of this is where we would fast forward and go through all of the process in the time lapse, right? Yeah. All right, something a little bit unique about these marine engines. You've got what's called a freshwater system, which is this boat has. If you're running on a freshwater lake, you wouldn't have to worry about having a heat exchanger. You'd just run the fresh water into the engine. But this boat runs on salt water, so we have a heat exchanger where raw water from outside the boat comes in, goes through the heat exchanger and cools down the antifreeze, the fresh water, in the engine, so that way your engine doesn't rot out. So you don't have your thermostat where you traditionally would on a normal engine. Instead, it goes over here where the heat exchanger is, and that's what this pipe here is for. So it goes in there, and then that pipe goes directly on your heat exchanger there. So kind of unique.
Are those 7/16s?
Yeah, I believe so. Or 3/8, one of the two. Okay, progress has been made. We kind of cleaned up the top here. I moved all the solenoid and wires and stuff down here. We hooked up this Canon plug here for some of the electronics. I think you guys can see that. It's hidden behind harness, but that has to be seated in kind of fully. It kind of clicks in place a little bit. If it doesn't, it'll tighten that up and it'll pop back off. So make sure you get that done. We hooked up this reservoir back here. 2 bolts that go into the brackets for the cooler go in there. The next step at this point, what do you think? Risers probably?
Yeah.
We'll have to put the risers up on both ends here. The bracket for this sits on that riser, and the bracket for this sits on this side of the riser. Okay, so we decided to run the wires for the spark plugs first before putting the risers on, because, well, the risers are always going to be in the way. So the firing order for this engine is 184-36572. You can tell because of the order right here. And so we think we got it right, hopefully. We got rotation, left hand rotation and right hand rotation, and you can tell the difference depending on what your firing order is. So if your intake manifold has that one, which ours does, then we know we're doing a left hand rotation. And then if your firing order is that one, you got a right hand rotation, and you just tell by that number there. So we're good on that. Now we can do the risers. All right, so we got the studs in here for our risers. Now this is a kind of a critical part here, since our boat here runs a cooler. We don't want any salt water getting into the engine. So the way the gasket setup is kind of unique. So we've got gaskets, and then we've got these block off plates that go in between the 2 gaskets, and then we've got a riser. Now the riser is not completely necessary, but for this boat here, if the exhaust is too far down, it goes below the water level, and when we stop, the water kind of rushes in back. So we put the riser up there to kind of raise it up above that to keep that from happening. So what we're going to do is I'm going to put a gasket down first over our stud here, and then on the block off plate we're going to put some,
I think we seal both sides.
yeah, we're going to seal both sides of the block off plate with this forma gasket, the aviation forma gasket, kind of sandwich it. We'll put the block off plate down and then put the next gasket over the top. It'll sort of look like a sandwich, like that. Then we put the riser, and then, excuse me, the spacer, then the riser will go on top. That's the order that goes in. Also remember, when you're putting these studs in, the side that has the least amount of thread goes into the exhaust, and the side with the most amount of thread comes out. Otherwise you're not going to have enough space to put the nut on there.
I've already forgotten which way the block off plate goes. I think that's part of getting off. Start losing that short term memory.
I'm breathing hard right into the camera here. It's gonna pick up all my.
Is that camera still on?
Yeah, I'm recording each step. I'll cut it out though. That's the power of editing. You can't hear my fat kid breathing. Okay, I fast forward a little bit. I don't have a lot of juice. I had to charge the camera up in the car. Got the exhaust on, finished up the risers, got all the different coolant lines all bolted up from the coolers and all over here in the thermostat. What we're getting ready to do now is fill it full of coolant. We're gonna put the oil in it. We're gonna turn the key on, check for fuel pressure, and then we'll crank it. We'll check the oil pressure with the coil off, the coil plug off. Once we know we have oil pressure, and then we'll try to fire it, and I'll turn the camera back on for that. Okay, so this is about a week later. Battery died on the GoPro, so we had to put it off, but everything's connected. We did verify that we've got power to the starter. Fuel pump is kicking on. We fought a ground problem. Make sure you connect all your grounds. It causes the havoc, but everything's hooked up, and I think we're ready to try our first crank over of this engine. So, Eric, you want to turn the key?
It's gonna have no fuel for a long time.
Oh, yeah, it's gonna fill up all the filters and everything. So, let's just see what happens here once.
Ready?
Yep. Oh, hold it. Sounded good. The coil's arcing out, but that's what we wanted, right? We want to check oil pressure, right?
Correct. We wanted to pump some oil.
Yeah, let's will the oil pressure gauge show up there if you crank over? Let's see if we got oil pressure. What'd you say?
I'm gonna start the other end just for a handle.
Oh, batteries on that one.
It is raising it, but it's not. I think.
Okay, so move. Oh, we got pressure. Okay, good. It's not where we want it yet, but it's worse. So we got. I think we're ready to go ahead and see if it'll fire off though, because we got fuel going into the throttle body. Yep, fuel's going in. So hold on a second. Don't do anything yet. This rain is just so loud. All right, coil's hooked up. We've got fuel. We got oil pressure. In theory, this thing should run. And the timing light is hooked up. We got the timing light connected to the power side of the ignition relay. We got it on the ground, and we got it on the #1 cylinder here. So once it fires off, we can start doing timing. We also, on these engines, there's a timing tool, they call it, as a plug. What you do with this, let me set you guys down here. With this timing tool, and it gives a little tag right here. You basically are gonna pull this plug out of here, and you flip the wire around. So right here, this is the normal run position. That wire is not connected to that wire. When you want to time it, you take and you flip this plug around like that, and now you can time it. And then that's what we're going to want to do here. And this shows you in the instructions, that's the same wire flipped around. You got time and you got run on it, which you couldn't see on the plug because it was too dark. And those are all the instructions. So that's what we're going to go through today. But for right now, we just want to hear this thing actually run for the first time since we bolted it in.
You need the timing light? Or?
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm just going to hold on to it for now. It should run right now, right?
Not building oil.
Oh, okay. All right, don't start it yet. Don't start it. Let me check all these gauge sensors down here first. All right, that's it. It ran. Started up and ran. Fired right off. That means we got the distributor in, right? Now it's just going to be a matter of timing it. All right, we got our excitement was a little bit short-lived here, so we got it running, and it seems like we're pretty close to time. So we know we got the timing, the wire's correct, and the distributor's in the right way. So the next step was to check for oil pressure, but the oil pressure gauge on our dash wasn't showing anything, and we didn't want to run it and time it with no oil pressure. So we went down here to the sender, and you're not going to be able to see this very well, but you got our sender here, and then you got the oil pressure warning alarm. And to test this sender, you pull the wire terminal off of it in the back. Let's see if I can get you in here. Pull this wire terminal off. We hook up our meter to the terminal and to the case, and we're reading 118 ohms, and which is right within range it should be with engine not running. With the engine running, that resistance value should drop, and when we ran it, the resistance value doesn't drop. So we're gonna call the engine builders and see what's going on with that. But for purposes of this video, it fires up, it runs, and it's installed. So we're just gonna have to figure out the oil pressure problem, and maybe that'll be a video for another day. And hopefully we don't have to yard this thing back out. All right, so fire up, run, sounded really good. Still needs some timing. There's a little bit of backfiring going on. Problem we have now is that there's no oil pressure in it, and we tested the sending unit, made sure the sending unit was working properly. but we ran it for a few seconds and we're not comfortable running it any longer without oil pressure, so we're going to get a manual gauge on it, make sure we got oil pressure. Some of you are thinking, well, why didn't you prime it before you stuck it in? Well, the engine builder does that on the engine stand and primes it and everything before it sends to us, so we didn't think to do that. But we're going to go and get an oil priming tool anyway, just so that way we can see for ourselves if we prime it, and on the manual gauge will we see oil pressure. So but for now we're going to leave it alone. We don't want to go any further until we get all that stuff. So that's it for now, guys. Thanks for watching.